Hey everyone, welcome to the Living and Active Word podcast. In this week's episode, we'll be talking about how Jesus is preeminent. If you remember where we left off last time, we were talking about John the Baptizer making it clear to his disciples that Jesus was to be prominent and that he, John, must decrease and Jesus must increase. Some commentators say that it is now John the Apostle who is writing in verses 31 through 36. But I don't think this is the case, especially seeing what John the Baptist is after, pointing people to Jesus and ultimately making them see that Jesus is preeminent. And what is the definition of the word preeminent? It means one who surpasses all others. And these verses are going to make it clear that Jesus truly is preeminent. Let's pick up in verse 31. It says, "He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth. He who comes from heaven is above all." John's going to give us several reasons why Jesus is preeminent. Firstly, it's because of his location, where Jesus came from, or his divine origin. He is from above. Earlier in the same chapter, in verse 13, Jesus said, "No one has ascended to heaven, but he who comes down from heaven, that is, the Son of Man who is in heaven." And verse 13 and this verse 31 speak of Jesus' divine origin. And then he goes on to say and says, "He who is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth." So he's making this contrast. One comes from heaven and one comes from earth. Who is greater? It would obviously be Jesus. And he says that. He goes on to say, "He who comes from heaven is above all." He literally is above all, location-wise, but he is in rank and in supremacy above all others. He is greater. Now let's read verse 32. "And what he has seen and heard, that he testifies, and no one receives his testimony." Not only is Jesus' location important, but his words or his testimony. He spoke of what he had seen and heard, the heavenly realities. He taught the truth. He taught the ways of God because he is God. But then John says, no one receives his testimony. I believe that he's speaking in generalities here because in John chapter 1, starting in verse 10, it says, "He was in the world, and the world was made through him. And the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God." So if you notice, it says, his own did not receive him. But then it says, but as many as received him. So he's speaking in generalities, that most did not receive him, Jesus, his words, his testimony, but that some did. And going back to verse 33 of chapter 3, it says, "He who has received his testimony has certified that God is true." So, once again, he is saying that most did not receive his testimony, but there would be some who did and do still to this day. And what? They certify, they authenticate that God is true and that his seal is upon them. Verse 34 says, "For he whom God has sent speaks the words of God. For God does not give the Spirit by measure." And so he's continuing with the same vein, right? It was his testimony, but now he says words. And I like what Peter said of Jesus' words. "With you are the words of life." And that's what Jesus brought. His words brought life. At the end of verse 34, John gives us another reason why Jesus is preeminent. Because he was given the Spirit without measure. No one else is that said of in the Bible. Not even Elijah or Elisha, nor Moses, David. There's no one, even Samson, not even the apostles, no prophet was this ever said of, that they had the Spirit without measure. John is pointing to the fact that Jesus is greater. Verse 35, "The Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hands." And I love that. the Father loves the Son. From all of eternity he has loved him. Jesus said in John chapter 15, as the Father has loved me, so I love you. We can take encouragement in that. We can be built up by that truth. But going back to what the message of this section is about, is that the Father loves Jesus and he gave all things into his hand. He gave him all authority. Even in other places, Jesus spoke of this. The Father has given all things into my hands to give life and to judge and everything in between. Once again, Jesus is preeminent. Verse 36, he who believes in the Son has everlasting life, and he who does not believe the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. And this is, I believe, John's last point, that Jesus is greater or above all because he is able to give life. And I like what some commentators pointed out is that presently he gives this eternal life. Today, right now, if you have Jesus, you have already eternal life. But there's the bad news. He who does not believe the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. You see, most of us know this who are listening, but maybe someone doesn't. There are only two choices when it comes to this preeminent one, when it comes to Jesus and being in relationship with him. Either we have received eternal life or we will receive death. We can either accept him and all that he offers or reject him and we get death. We get the wrath of God and it abides on him. So we can only be in one or the other, in life or in death. And the final results of rejecting Jesus are receiving the wrath of God. But thankfully, we have the option, we have the choice of being in right relationship with him, receiving his life given to us. So what's the big point for today? What's the big picture? I'm sure you got it by now, but it's the reality that Jesus is preeminent, whether we recognize it or not. However, we should live in light of the fact that he is above all, that he is preeminent, that he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, that he has the name which is above every other name, that we should live in submission and adoration and give our entire lives to him. Why? Because he must increase and we must decrease, because he is greater. And he has shown his love for us. Let us show our love for him. Thank you for listening. I hope you are blessed, and I hope you tune in next time.